I suppose we can start with one of two things. Obviously, I brought up critical race theory, but also the vaccine issue. I'm not sure if you guys have a preference for what you were.
We can talk about the vaccine.
Why don't we talk about what's going on with vaccine passports?
Sure.
We've seen in Sydney, for instance, they issued a lockdown. Or I should say enough people ignored it. They went out in the streets, and then this resulted in news articles saying chaos in Sydney. People aren't, they're not following the rules. The vaccination rate in Australia is ridiculously low. I think it's 18%, really, really low. Well, then they called in police, and there were big protests. Now they've actually deployed military. So I'm curious if either of you wants to jump in with your thoughts on mandates. What would happen if they came here, if you're for or against them?
Look, there are elements of mandates that I can agree with. We've already set standards for other things like the MMR vaccine, very basic standard vaccines that we expect everyone to get before they can go to school, travel. And I think for the most part that's worked. We've eradicated plagues from the world. I think we should be proud of that. With regards to COVID, since this is an ongoing pandemic, we need to focus on approaches that are effective and that don't ostracize or exacerbate tensions. With regard to the Australian situation, it's not something I'm extensively familiar with, but generally speaking, I don't think that cracking down on protests is going to be an effective way to incentivize people to get vaccinated. What's happening in New York might be, but my main issue with it is that I'm not entirely sure how they expect people to still have their vaccination card. I know that there's been some confusion from the beginning as to whether or not you should keep that. I know people have thrown theirs away. They made it too big for wallets. It just felt a little bit haphazardly planned from the forego, so that's unfortunate. Maybe they can find other ways to incentivize it, like for example in schools where they have a direct access to government records where they wouldn't have to use those little cards. That might be a little bit better. I guess we'll have to see.
Well, I'm not saying you believe this, but some people on the left, I never want to hear about the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical history to try to get into a restaurant in New York City. Yeah, look, I'm not getting the vaccine, so I'm part of the 100 million people that are unvaccinated. And it's an experimental vaccine. The FDA and CDC has said that in January. It's questionably effective. Lindsey Graham just came down with COVID. You had a ship in the United Kingdom, 100% vaccinated ship that came down with COVID. It's more like a treatment than a vaccine. I'll leave that conversation to Dr. Brett Weinstein and the people that really understand how that works. But yeah, this is medical apartheid. This is trying to create a two-tiered system where if you don't make the proper medical decisions, you're not able to go to Broadway shows or go into restaurants, even when the efficacy of this vaccine is questionable at best. We see that in Israel, an 85% vaccinated country that's about to lock down again. And most of the new cases are from vaccinated patients, not unvaccinated patients in Israel. So, sorry, you want to interject, Tim? But
yeah.
Obviously against mandates, and I think people should be able to make their own medical decisions. I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, I disagree. I think we actually have a story we wrote on Timcast.com that our view of the lockdowns is that it's alarmism because a new study from the Public Health of England found the Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective after 2 doses at staving off the Delta variant, and AstraZeneca was 92%.
I could probably agree it's alarmism, but it's enough of an alarm for the public health leaders to undermine the argument that the vaccine is a solution to what would possibly satisfy the public.
So,
I mean, I was against the lockdowns in the first place. Let me be very clear when there was 1,000 deaths a day, not 334. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, a couple of points on this. First of all, it's experimental in the sense that there was an expedited process for its release, but there have been full and extensive studies taken on the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. The reason why the FDA study hasn't been finished, the reason why it hasn't been fully vetted, isn't because they're looking for long-term health effects. It's because they're determining the extent to which it protects you over a long period of time. Ergo, the fact of the matter is, by all available data, this is undeniably much safer to get the vaccine. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Well, wait, a couple things, because you said a few things there. There are some instances where areas have more people being infected if they're already vaccinated. But if you take a look at, this is like data mining. If you take a look at the broader statistics, especially here in America, the number of people who have gotten breakthrough cases is something like 0.003% of people who have been vaccinated. You can take a look at the numbers. Where is this new wave exploding? It's in the unvaccinated. In spite of the fact that fewer and fewer people are remaining unvaccinated, the vaccinated stay relatively healthy. And not only do they get infected way less often, they also suffer far fewer severe symptoms. Their hospitalization rates have plummeted, and their deaths are incredibly low compared to people who are unvaccinated. This is by all means an effective vaccine.
What's your opinion of Johnson & Johnson, the FDA saying that it might cause a rare nerve disease?
That's something that, first of all, when you take a look at that, you have to recognize that Even if that was the case.
Which the FDA says it is.
Right. Well, they're looking into it, of course. It
No,
does seem-
they issued an official warning that it could issue a rare nerve disease. That's a big deal.
could issue, of course. They're looking into it. And that is something to look into and to be concerned about.
What's your opinion of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System?
Hold on.
Where
Let's-
there's
let's-
over,
let's-
No, I'm just curious because
Let's do the Guillain-Barré syndrome,
Yeah.
though. I think you want to.
Yeah, so of course, stuff like that can happen. Now, even if that claim is the case, it would remain the fact that unless the extent of that potential nerve damage is just apocalyptically severe, that the effects of getting COVID would still be far, far worse than the potential side effects of that vaccine. However, if you were to say, let's say worst case, Johnson & Johnson, it's not viable, that gets pulled, we see what the consequences are, that doesn't really speak against the greater viability of the vaccines. I got Pfizer, for example. We're talking hundreds of millions of people who have either been protected against the vaccine in part, or if they get it, against the virus, or if they get it, their effects, their symptoms are much, much, much more manageable.
So I just want to just play into the irony here that I'm the one criticizing the pharmaceutical companies and you're the one defending. I just think I think it's delicious.
Wait, hold on. That's an extremely dishonest talking point.
Because you're peddling the Pfizer vaccine. You're saying it's so effective. So many people have taken it. And I'm the one saying, hold on, maybe AstraZeneca, Moderna,
Charlie.
Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer.
This is
Let's talk about the points he's made. And
no, I was just enjoying the irony.
Well, the thing is, it's not really like irony if you understand the issue at hand. See, my praise doesn't go to the pharmaceutical companies or their CEOs. It goes to the tireless workers who spend months and months and months developing these vaccines.
Who's getting rich
very big
from
fan.
this vaccine?
Well, hold on. Have I at any point praised the distribution or profiteering system?
Who do you think
behind
gets rich
Pfizer?
from vaccine mandates?
This is
the workers or the Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless.
Isn't that your whole
Wait, hold on.
shtick?
This is a toothless
workers'
critique
rights.
that you could.
Let's
Hold on.
let's try and go back and forth, man.
This is a toothless critique that you could apply to literally anything that you don't like. Everything in this country is manufactured to the profit of
but
CEOs.
we don't mandate it, and so you can't go to restaurants if you don't get one of
so-
four major
if
pharmaceutical
let me-
medicines.
So wait, I just want to say, if that's your criticism,
That's one of many.
Then you should. So if that's the criticism you want to focus on, I'm in favor of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm willing to take it that far. But whether or not that's on the table, and I can't just make that happen, when we're talking strictly about the effectiveness of the vaccine, it seems to be effective. That's not a praise of the capitalist industry behind it.
No, I was just enjoying the irony. That's all.
not irony.
Well, it's
Charlie.
totally ironic because I'm the one saying that they might be lying to us, and you're the one that's saying it's super effective.
Wait, what
Which
lie?
usually, if we were wearing our traditional uniforms, right versus left, it would be the other way around. That's all I'm saying.
The only comment I'm making
what
is
do you have to say about VAERS, though?
vaccine.
What do you have to say about the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that says, well, over 7,000 people experienced death after getting the vaccine? Does that worry you?
The VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally used.
Do you think
to
it's
form an accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is, right? Can you tell me what VAERS is?
Yeah, VAERS is a government website that physicians or individuals can submit complaints or concerns after an adverse event report from a vaccine. Since you cannot win in court against a vaccine production company, then they go through some process where the government then can distribute some form of remedy if you had an adverse event reaction.
Right.
That's what VAERS is.
And researchers like it because if you take a vaccine or you get some other procedure, any medical drug done, you can report the effects there, and it can be a way of gathering sort of aggregate data concerning the effects of these potential treatments. The problem is researchers don't use this as a bulletproof way of determining the outcome or effect of anything because they're literally just unvetted online submissions that anybody can put in.
So I agree.
I ask you because I want to know, how do you arrive at the conclusion that how many people did you say applied?
Well, it's VAERS' own data is 7,000 plus, and most of which, by the way,
that anyone can submit.
No,
I'm asking,
by the
how
way,
do you
most of
arrive-
which are physicians submitted. Just so you know, these are
the total number.
most of the submissions on the VAERS website are done by like family doctors or local physicians. So I'm just asking, what number of adverse event reactions would you say maybe there's something wrong?
But I'm asking,
10,000 deaths.
How do you know these deaths were caused by
20,000 deaths?
vaccines?
No, I'm just saying that's what VAERS says, right?
No, wait, but so I need to know this.
We
because
don't.
You can, so
That's the
VAERS
question.
So wait, is these just people who have died after taking the vaccine? Like they may have died from some medical incident afterwards, and it just gets put up there. And
This is
we're
the
saying
question.
that's because of the
Usually, a
vaccine?
vaccine gets pulled when you have 15 attributable deaths. We have 7,000 that we have to go through. The question is, when do you call timeout
Wait,
and say, maybe we should
You're not answering the
mandate
question.
it?
How do you know that they're from the vaccine?
We don't. That's the point.
Oh,
but you
okay.
don't either. But the position is, let's mandate experimental medicine. We don't know actually what's happening.
If you don't know, then how can you say that medical doctors are the one uploading this information? Is there any methodology you're looking at to determine
do know
these
who's
deaths were
actually
from it?
uploading it. We know that. We know the entries are usually
What are the
and
claims
typically
being made?
traditionally. How about menstrual cycle disruption, loss of nerve capacity, unable to walk, paralysis, miscarriages, mood changes. Also, you could go through the VAERS database like, oh, that's interesting.
Mood changes. What about the death?
Let me interject
Death
something
is
real quick.
7,000 plus. That's a serious
I
number.
wanna-
How do they know it's from the vaccine? I keep asking you this. You don't.
Let
have
me
an
let me
answer.
address 2 points, one from each of you, real quick, so we can try and. How do we know it's from the vaccine? It's a difficult question. I would say that if you have a mass vaccination program which gives out 330 million doses or so, and then people start saying, "Hey, I got the vaccine, then this happened." VAERS isn't here to say it is or isn't. They're here to say, can we find a pattern in this? And I think 7,000 suggests there may be one at the very least. I'm not a scientist, so I can't stress that. I will also say, however, to Charlie, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, it's a side effect.
I always mispronounce it.
Yeah, me too.
Guillain-Barré.
Barre. There you go.
Yeah, something like that.
My understanding is actually a side effect of many vaccines.
Yeah, it is.
And so,
Totally, that's correct. It could be.
well, so the issue I have is one of the things that Vaush brought up is that there's been, how many you mentioned, 100 million, 160 million?
In the
115, I think it is, million.
Who have been fully vaccinated?
Fully vaccinated.
I think in that ballpark.
So,
Maybe a
of
bit
course, if you have something very different from any other vaccination we normally do, because we're not having everyone do it all at once.
Yeah, and so this is a mass inoculation thing. And so here's why the American system should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights.
So
Yield to rights. Allow
Well,
people
so-
to say no. Let me just build out the argument, right? So for me, for example, I'm 27. I don't consider COVID to be a largely disproportionate risk to my way of life. I don't know about this vaccine. I have gotten other vaccines in my life. So I want to be able to have the right to say no to that. So the American system, Constitution, kind of like the tradition, is to be able to have people have nuance, preferences, and individualism. When it comes to these sort of complex issues, not saying you can't go to a restaurant because we want you to take experimental medicine.
Right. So a couple of points on that. First of all, if we're speaking to legal rights, the Supreme Court found over a century ago that when it came to vaccinations, this was a special exemption from some people's rights to.
I will
determine their
agree with
medical
you
history.
that the
It's
courts
like
are not on my side.
1904 in that one. And there's a reason why. Because, of course, when you choose not to take the vaccine, you contribute to the removal of others' freedoms. See, it's true. You do have a freedom to not or to take a vaccine. But I think other people should have the freedom to not grow up in a world ridden by plague. And with the way this disease, COVID, mutates with time, as all diseases do, inevitably, if it continues to circle the world long enough, and this is an international problem, not just an American one, new strains will develop, which will slowly ebb at the effectiveness of this set of vaccines. So it threatens all of us. May I say one other thing?
Yeah,
Sorry. With all of that being said, just to speak to VAERS, VAERS is an incredibly effective system for locating and roughly attributing concerns related to the effects of drugs. The problem is that there are several elements to this disease that make it really difficult to pinpoint anything specific. The two of which being A, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. That is a huge range to pull data from. And B, the propagandist fear campaign about an incredibly effective vaccine process that may lead people to misattribute
I just want to get a
deaths
quick
that they
clarification.
experience to vaccines.
Sorry.
But just quick clarification. Are you for mandating the COVID-19 vaccine?
The same way we have other vaccines, like school, travel, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what if someone wanted to go to a restaurant or a supermarket or a movie theater?
I think that, we don't have that for other vaccines, right? Like every time you go to a movie theater, you have a little card. I understand that might be an effective panic measure, but long term, my goal would be to integrate it into the same revenue of vaccines.
I think that's a more reasonable response than some politicians. I'm just going to be honest.
People are panicking.
No, I think that's a more,
people die.
well, yeah.
I just want to make sure we weren't having misunderstanding.
No, I think that's more of a reasonable answer. I just curious, just on the vaccine topic in general. Are you concerned by Dr. Malone coming out, who literally invented the mRNA vaccine and says that there's a dangerous spike protein involved, and he encourages people to think twice before getting it? Does that move you at all?
Well, you're free to speak with your doctor. When it comes to
Dr. Malone, just his specific commentary. The guy who invented this type of vaccine.
Well, I'm not a PhD, and I doubt that he was directly involved in the production of these vaccines.
No, he literally invented this type
the
of
mRNA,
vaccine.
but with the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, the Moderna.
But he's very, very aware of the sort of accelerated implementation. He's trying to call time out and tell people this is not like any other vaccine. Does that worry you? His claim is that it involves a spike protein. It was rushed to market. It's going to have side effects. You don't understand it like I did. I invented this. And you got to think twice before mandating it or even taking it if you're under a certain age. Does that bother you?
What makes the current retinue of vaccines that we take, the mRNA process, different from other mRNA vaccines?
It doesn't involve the spike protein. According to him, the same composition as like the measles, mumps, rubella type vaccine or the chickenpox vaccine.
Well, those weren't mRNA. The process wasn't developed back during the MMR vaccine.
Totally, but some of them are getting updated for the more mRNA type technology,
but
right?
If he wasn't involved in the production of these modern vaccines, how could he possibly have any comment on any of the rigors or tests that were done
because he invented this type of vaccine. I'm just saying, does that bother you? Do you think he's just like a fear propagandist and like...
No, he may well have concerns, but those are concerns that I would rather have addressed by the scientific community rather than, with respect to you and myself, YouTubers.
Well, no, I agree. But the question is which scientists, right? So there's a lot of scientists speaking out against this. Dr. Brett Weinstein, Dr. Malone.
What
right?
is Dr. Brett Weinstein's
He's an
specialty?
evolutionary biologist, so he knows a little bit about how
not virology.
Cellular function works.
That is not virology. That is a completely spurious
so let me
association.
do you trust Fauci more or Dr. Brett Weinstein?
It's not about Fauci. It's about Fauci.
He's a virologist who's been wrong about everything.
It's about the global... Well, hold on. He's smiling with glee here. It's the global medical community in this regard.
You mean like the WHO? Like
no, I'm not... Hold on. Wait,
put a name behind it.
He's very excited. Interrupt me.
Yeah, let's...
I just want to say, it's not just about the WHO. We're talking about a unified effort on the part of virtually every country on earth to get a hold of the vaccines that us Americans are privileged to have. This isn't some like pharmaceutical Dr. Fauci push that wasn't broadly supported by any of the relevant experts. In the mRNA field, which is not huge because it's a very new development, internationally, there is a demand for these vaccines.
I wanted to add, just based on what you had said, I can pull up Reuters. Their fact check is that vaccines are not, quote, cytotoxic. They go on to mention that Robert Malone, and they show the Brett Weinstein podcast, they show the post, the FDA was alerted months ago that the spike protein in the COVID vaccines are cytotoxic, toxic to cells. The FDA did nothing. Reuters says this is not true. Now, the issue at hand is trust. Like you mentioned, you said, do you trust Fauci or Weinstein? I don't know if there is a fact-based argument if you have the doctors you trust and the doctors you trust or the organizations you trust. It's a clash of who you believe, to be honest.
None of us have the credentials to just come up with these arguments on their own. There will always be bias in who we choose to believe. However, given the plurality of people seem to support the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the fact that it doesn't take a virologist to notice that over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID, more than the combined death tolls of every war since World War I combined, including the Second World War in Vietnam. Those are things that I don't need to be a virologist to see. I can see it happening.
Can I ask you a question, though?
That's pretty bad.
One of the issues that's brought up frequently, especially on Twitter, is that many of these COVID deaths are died with COVID, as it's brought up, where people would say something like it tends to be people who are over 70 or things like that. Mm-hmm. I'm only bringing that up not to make the argument, but because you said, how would VAERS know if these are actually related to the vaccine?
I'd love to respond to that if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So COVID rarely, directly kills you. Like age, it causes a breakdown in other vital functions that then their death can be attributed as such. So, for example, of the many things that people die, it's not really COVID, it's just that COVID blanks their entire system internally, and eventually something fails, something breaks, and they die. There were people claiming that there were deaths being spuriously attributed to COVID-19 very early on in this pandemic, but thankfully we know that's not the case, because if you take a look at the excess mortality numbers, the number of people who should die every year in the United States, because there's a very normal pattern, normally with this many people in this country, we see an excess, starting when COVID started, that almost perfectly graphs on to the rising death waves of COVID. I mean, it perfectly tracks onto that.
I just want to say for you, Charlie, I think, the issue I see here is, for me, it's I can't trust or distrust. I don't know. I think Brett Weinstein's a very smart guy, and I don't think he's going to lie to me. And these doctors are very smart people. And then I see the government agencies that, I don't always trust the government, to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan. But to believe that there's like a nefarious effort or anything like that, ultimately what it comes down to is, in my opinion, having a trusted medical professional that you can consult with.
Well, I totally agree. And I think there could be an argument that if you're over the age of 70, that this vaccine might be a really good idea for you. However, to mandate it for schools and for colleges, when these are highly complex medical decisions, That's where I'm going to push back against it.
Well,
it's
real
rather
quick,
complex
let me
medical
point
They are
out
complex
the
medical
Johnson and
decisions.
Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, though. Is that's my understanding?
I
It's an
don't want to
MMR?
speak out of turn.
I believe so.
Yeah,
I would
think
love to be
that's right.
fact checked on that.
I'm not totally sure.
My memory is
So
faulty.
I guess another question I have: what do you think of alternative type treatments, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin? Why the push for mass inoculation?
Well, because hydroxychloroquine studies have found it largely ineffective. There was, I believe, a French study that stopped when people started dying of heart failure. I think the only reason the right dies on this hill is because Trump mentioned it. I don't think there'd be a push for it otherwise. The vaccines are the effective way of getting mass populations inoculated. And while it is true that most of the people who die are ancient, the fact remains that people experience long-term side effects from getting COVID, even if they survive. I know people who are in their 30s, and me, a blistering 27-year-old myself, I'm not especially worried, but I've heard them talk about how much harder it is for them to climb up flights of stairs. I know that erectile dysfunction, fellas, is one of the listed potential side effects of getting COVID, even young, healthy, no other problems. It is true that death is most comorbid with age and pre-existing conditions, but still. And that's not even to speak of the COVID variants. I mean, right now we're on, Delta? But if it keeps cycling around the world, let it go for another year. Who knows how bad this could get?
So Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. So there's an alternative to mRNA if you're concerned about it.
And there was some guidance with the nerve disease with that. Sorry to interrupt.
I do think we kind of overlooked something really interesting is that when did we mandate vaccinations in public schools?
Well, I know the Supreme Court case concerning this was in 1904,
Yeah.
so I would know it would have to have been earlier than that. I know that Washington even had his troops vaccinated, though I
For
forget.
smallpox.
Yeah.
Smallpox, was it?
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy to think
Inoculated, not Yeah, you're right.
about. Right, I don't know what they did, hit people with a rock and then
It was
pour
like
liquid
they had like a
in.
needle, I think.
It was-
and they would
yeah.
they would prick you with the needle that had like a weakened sample or something.
And they would have had to forge that needle, like with a blacksmith. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like Washington's,
I know, like someone pouring it and then
Yeah.
today it's just a machine that makes it.
that's just wild to think about.
Well, so, man, I think the real issue for the most part is just mandatory.
Well, I just also have another question. Do you think that there might be any bad motives behind these four companies, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, considering they are big pharma and they pursue profits, which generally, as a libertarian socialist, you're skeptical of? Do you think maybe they might have nefarious motives?
Oh, their intentions are reprehensible. They have for many years made money off the backs of American deaths. The opioid crisis is almost entirely attributable to the
And the
malfeasance.
Sackler family.
Yeah, I mean, no moral love for these companies. If this could be, and by the way, the mRNA process was developed through public funding. It was, an effort invested in by the collective good, something I'm generally supportive of. When it comes to these companies themselves, and when I say, go get your Pfizer vaccine, whatever, please do not mistake this or anything else that I say for an endorsement of the practices of these companies. It is only through cruel twist of fate and the economic system we live in that they are the ones put in a position to handle this. But it was the workers at those companies, not the CEOs, who did the work.
I'm just curious, does that ever make you stop short and say, maybe they're trying to massively inoculate us on a vaccine that might not be as effective to try to pursue profit, not well-being? Does that ever enter into your
It's a
kind of calculation?
consideration. It's a consideration you should take about anything produced by any company that's run for profit, which is everything. Basically every need in American society is tempered by the knowledge that there are people out there who are paid very large salaries to sell it to you. This is the case for everything we do, everything we eat. Every time you run down Main Street, or in my case, I guess, the boulevards in Los Angeles, you're seeing the protracted efforts of $1 billion industry to make sure you want things they're selling. Could that be the case for COVID? Undeniably, there was a profit incentive involved. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. And there was probably a protracted effort on the part of these companies to make sure they were the first, and they probably took every dirty advantage they could
What
get.
if
With the data available, I have to still, much as I would say, hey, I would prefer eating McDonald's food to starvation, I have to say this is probably still something we should be doing.
Do you want to do? I don't want to stay. It's been 20 minutes.
No,
so
for sure.
Do you want to make a final point?
Maybe you would starve instead
I
of
actually
McDonald's,
think
I
this
don't
has
know.
been really constructive and not like that, inflammatory. I think that deep down you have this kind of, urge that I'm already there, where maybe they want this thing to go on for another decade, to go make another $100 billion. And maybe the cheap drug of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin might work better than they might think.
I don't have that urge.
Other studies would disagree with you earlier. We could change the topic. I just think it's
So
that was a healthy discourse.
Can I meet in the middle on that one, on that very last one?
Yeah.
I do not trust the pharmaceutical industries, though the available evidence does seem to point to the effectiveness of the vaccines. I say this, nationalize the pharma industry. Seriously. It could be used for the collective good, and I would unironically actually trust it more in the hands of our ineffective, bloated government than I would the sociopaths who run it currently. And
So
I mean that.
I'll wrap this up by saying, always talk to your doctor. This is one of the biggest things. Like YouTube is very strict on this, especially. But I genuinely think this is the right answer. If you're watching this, don't assume anyone here is right or wrong. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think Charlie's made a bunch of good points, and you have. Ultimately, it's down between you and your doctor. And I'll stress, for whatever your opinion, Charlie, I understand. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin haven't been approved by the FDA, and so that's just another.
We're just asking questions whether
Right.
it works or not.
So that's why I think it's really important, because I think there are. I got to be honest. In regards to ivermectin, people have been eating horse paste that they sell. I looked up what the FDA says about it. They say do not do this, and they actually give a very good reason. They say, although people are claiming that if an animal can take it, someone else can. That's not true. There's some things that dogs can't have that humans can. Right. So please talk to your doctor, and I definitely hope we can continue having debates about this stuff, because that was vastly important. I'm really glad you guys were able to have that conversation.
I hadn't even heard of the horse paste thing. That's
Yes.
horrifying.
Ivermectin is technically a drug for horses. It's off-label use.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a dewormer. And so you can go to like Tractor Supply, and they have a sign that says like, do not eat this, and please.
Any drug for horses will burn a human out from the inside. Those things you've been near, they're titans. They're like.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.